Okay, we're still on Chesed Aleph, 8a. So just a comment from Rabbi Gimple from yesterday. We're discussing what is the hypothetical the Gemara is entertaining in suggesting that we might be able to have more than one woman processed at once. We're discussing whether or not that means they would have only raised Hashem's name once and then given it to both of them. Or does it mean they each get their own cup of water, but they just happen to be standing there at the same time? So Rabbi Gimple noted, and this is a good point, that the halacha is that the scroll of the Sotah, the scroll upon which the section of Torah is written and then later erased, must be written with the intention of it being used for one specific woman. The Shema, it's like a get, like a divorce paper, where the divorce paper must be written for the sake of the husband and the wife, as opposed to just random names. And if the names happen to align, I buy it in the store and then use it. It has to be written for the sake of these people. And the same thing is true of the scroll used for the Sotah waters. If that's the case, and if the Gemara knows that halacha at this point, then obviously we could not suggest that they would have one scroll raised once for both of them. That would be an incorrect assumption if the Gemara knows this halacha at this point in time. So assuming the Gemara knows this halacha, then processing two women at once would mean, like Tosfos says exclusively, they're just standing there at the same time. Even if they're not
two procedures.
Two procedures simultaneously.
One or simultaneously.
Simultaneously two procedures, which would mean one kohen, let's say, is doing both of them and then giving her a speech and then giving her a speech, or maybe giving the same speech at once, and then they drink their water. But because they see each other, they can feed off each other's confidence. Or you have the issue of the kohen throwing off considering the mitzvahs as if it's like a burden and he wants to get them over and done with. Either way, it's two different cups of water. It has to be, if we're going to assume the Gemara knows that halacha at this point, which I don't see why we shouldn't. And that would be the Gemara's assumption. So just clarifying that from yesterday.
Right. So, and that also clarifies that you can't separate erasing and drinking.
Yeah.
Once you establish that erasing is for one.
Yeah. Well, once the water is mixed, two waters for two different sotas could be mixed together, or shouldn't be mixed together, but if they did, they're not invalid. So I don't think that's what the Gemara is talking about. It would seem, if we can't get away with erasing Hashem's name less, because it has to be written for each woman individually, then the Gemara just means that they're both standing there at the same time. So simultaneously being processed. Okay. Gemara goes further in analyzing the procedure. So we're halfway down the page of Ches Amud Aleph, 8a. It's a bit more than halfway, 2/3 down. The line begins with the word B'shnei Kohanim. There's a colon, and then it says Kohen Oichet B'Bukadeha, and then again a colon. So the Gemara gets to the next stage in the procedure, which the Mishnah described, after she's taken up and down and moved all around, and then positioned at that door. Then the Mishnah says that the kohen holds onto her clothing and tears her clothing. Right, that was what we talked about. Tears her clothing and undoes her hair. Okay. Tanan Rabbanan, our sages taught. The verse reads explicitly, Uparda eseroish ha'isha. And the kohen should expose, that's the word parda means here, to expose, pei reish ayin, the head of the woman. Okay, so just literally taking the verse as is, expose the hair of the woman, might just mean you take off her kerchief. Now you've exposed her head. Right? You expose the head of the woman. It could just mean just take off her kerchief. Right? That's what it could mean. But the Gemara analyzes. In the Elaroisha, one might suggest that this only means we expose her head, gufa. The fact that we expose her body, which is what the Mishnah said, right? He tears her clothing. Menayin, from where do we derive this law that her body is also to be exposed, not just her hair? So Talmud Lemar comes the verse and says, Ha'isha, the woman. Meaning to say, it could have just said, Upara Asaroisha. It could have said, and he exposes her hair. Her head, I'm sorry. Why does it add? He exposes the head of the woman. Good morning, Alan. Why does it say exposes the head of the woman? It could have just said he exposes her head. It's the fact that it says the woman comes to add another element of what he exposes, namely her body. Okay? So, in Cain, if so, Matamad Lemar is Para Israisha. What is the verse coming and saying? That he exposes her head, right? Because the verse actually.
I thought the verse was head of the woman.
All right, 1 second. Yes, it's head of the woman. It's another verse. How come there's no quotation here on the side? All right, hold on 1 second. Just make sure. Bamidbar. What chapter is it? Chapter 5. Okay. So let's just look at the verse quickly here. It's the second half of chapter 5. No, it doesn't repeat itself. Okay, the parashashation is a couple of them. No, it doesn't repeat itself. I don't see it, at least. Okay, it just seems the Gemara is saying that if we've gotten to the point where we expose both her head and body, because we say that the verse says "Uparas reish ha'isha," then why are we singling out the head in the verse? That's what seems the Gemara is asking. Let me just go back to the Mishnah.
Where established the body, why?
That's what it seems the Gemara is asking. But you just, when I looked at the Gemara the first time, this didn't dawn on me. But now that you say it, it's hitting me a little bit. So let's see. Yeah, it just seems like why the Gemara. It seems like the Gemara is just asking why are we stressing the head if the body is also exposed, meaning something. No, it's something.
The head, right?
Sorry.
Why would it normally include the head? If you were to.
Yeah, but I don't know how else the Mishnah would have like. How else the verse would have worded it. Let me see Resteinsaltz. I didn't even notice that when I prepared this. Now it's bothering me. Okay, let's see. Looking at 8. Just looking at my phone to see what Rabbi Steinzelt says. 8a, right? Yeah, that's what he says. What I assumed that because we already exposed her hair, then it includes her head also. So why single out her head? In other words, if the verse just said that we expose her, then that would include head and body. So why separate them? Head of the woman implying the body. If so, why single out the head?
Yeah, that's what it seems like. Okay, so says the Gemara, Malamed, this implies that there's an extra addition of exposing that happens on the head beyond the rest of the body, namely Saisera Saira. Not only does he remove her kerchief and expose her hair, but he undoes the braids. So, in other words, the verse says that we expose her. That's implied by the verb. That's implied in the word Ha'isha, the woman. That we expose her, and that would include both head and body. But then by singling out her head, it means that her head gets an extra addition of exposing. Namely, we undo her, or the Kohen undoes her braids. Okay. Now the Gemara continues and it's analyzing the Mishnah. The Mishnah that went on to say, Rabbi Huda is of the opinion that Liba, etc., if her heart was, and so on. So let's look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah said a dispute. The first opinion was you rip her clothing until her chest is exposed. Rabbi Huda said if her chest was good looking, and he wouldn't reveal it. And if her hair was good looking, he would not expose it. He wouldn't expose it, but he wouldn't undo her braids. Right? So Rabbi Huda is concerned, would appear, Rabbi Huda is concerned with people's reaction. If she's a good-looking woman and she's exposed, and there's people standing around and watching, it might cause someone's imagination to run wild. And that's what the Gemara says. Lememra, does this mean to say that Rabbi Huda Chayish is concerned lehirhura for people's imagination, right? Which is why he's saying that if her chest is good looking, don't rip her clothing, and if her hair is good looking, don't undo the braids, because he's concerned with what people around are going to start thinking. Okay, and then that would imply, but that the sages, he disagreed and said universally, they didn't make any caveat. The sages said just always expose her chest, always undo her braids. So it would mean that those sages, they are not concerned with people's imagination. That's what's implied from our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, it would seem, though, however, that we have another Mishnah which seems to say the opposite. That Rabbi Huda is not concerned with people's thought, people's imagination, and the sages are. It seems to be exact opposite. The Tanya, we've learned, and this is with respect to the law of capital punishment. So after a person, either a man or a woman, is tried in court and convicted of capital punishment, and they take the convict, the defendant, from the besting, which is in the city, to outside the city, to where capital punishment will be executed. So she's there. They are then stripped down. They're stripped down. This is specifically the capital punishment by stoning. So she's stripped down. So the Mishnah there says, Ha'ish, the man, machasan oisai perek echad milafanav. One article of clothing is placed in the front of him to cover his reproductive organ. Just that one part is covered. But Va'isha, a woman gets shnei prakim, gets two articles of clothing. Echad milfanaha, one in front, ve'echad milchara, one in back of her, because her reproductive organ is visible from both sides. And therefore, she has to have two cloths, one to cover the front and one to cover the back. Because both sides are that organ, and therefore both sides are covered. This is the words of Rabbi Huda. So in our Mishnah, Rabbi Huda says, if she is good looking, don't expose her chest. Whereas when it comes to capital punishment, the only part of her body that's to be covered is just the reproductive organ, which means her chest is completely exposed in Rabbi Huda's view, which seems to mean Rabbi Huda is not concerned with people looking at her and their imagination going wild. Whereas when the sages say, Ha'ish, a man, niskal, is stoned, put to death by capital punishment, arum, completely in the nude. But ve'ena ish niskel is aruma. But a woman is not nude if she were to be stoned. So it's exactly the opposite. In the issue of capital punishment, the sages are of the view that the woman should not be undressed, her chest should not be revealed. Whereas in our Mishnah, the sages say that the woman who's drinking the sotah, her chest can be revealed. And Rabbi Huda also seems to be contradicting each other. In our Mishnah, Rabbi Huda says, if she's good looking, do not expose her chest. Whereas when it comes to capital punishment, Rabbi Huda is of the view she's completely in the nude, with the exception of her reproductive organ, except for her genitalia. So it's contradiction. So first, the Gemara addresses the dispute, the contradiction in Rabbi Huda's view. Amar Rabba says, Hacha, here, the reason why here, with the law of the Sotah, she is not to be exposed if she is good looking in Rabbi Huda's view. Time amai, what's the reason? Because Shema, perhaps, Tates and Bezdin, she will leave the court, Zakais, meritorious, right? We don't know what happened behind closed doors. And perhaps it'll turn out that she didn't do anything wrong, which means retroactively she was, embarrassed kind of for no reason. She was exposed for no reason. And what's going to happen? And the young Kohanites, it doesn't necessarily mean them specifically, as Asher points out. It could be anybody present, but the young Kohanites would have been the ones hanging around. So these young Kohanim, these young Kohanim who saw her exposed, they're going to get excited. Young guys, and they see a woman who got, stripped down, and she's still alive, and it turns out she didn't misbehave. So that only adds to their imagination because they think there's a possibility. Maybe they can be with her. But Hassam, over there, and that's what Rabbi Huda says, don't expose her chest if she's good looking. But Hassam over there, with respect to capital punishment, Hamistalka, she's going to get killed and stoned. And because she's now she's deceased, the young Kohanim, or not young Kohanim, the people around who see her don't have anywhere to go with their imagination because she's no longer here. And that's why Rabbi Huda says over there, we're not so concerned with her being in the nude. Anybody's going to die, and no one's going to care for that. No one's going to care for her. But in the case of the Sotah woman, if she's exposed, and it turns out she's turns out she's clean, she's not impure, and she survives, and all those young Kohanim who watched her are now maybe thinking about her and may want to be with her, keeping their imagination going. This is the Gemara's resolution in Rabbi Huda's view. The Gemara presses further. Unless it should suggest that Asi, even if this woman is not alive, which is why Rabbi Huda said we're okay with her being exposed because she's going to die, and there's nowhere to think about her anymore because she's no longer around. Now, if you're going to suggest Asi li grui Nisa, that because they saw her undressed, because they saw her in the nude, they're now going to get excited and want to be with other women, meaning not with her. Okay, so she's dead. We don't want to be with her. But maybe these people who are seeing her will now start thinking about other women. Says the Gemara, Rava says, Community, the sages have it by tradition. The Ein Yetzer Hara Charlotte, the inclination, the evil inclination only controls only that which one sees. In other words, when one visualizes something, then the heart starts to get excited and want. But if it's no longer there to see anymore, then if a person doesn't get excited anymore. So it's not as if like my desire for one will transfer to another. The one I see, that's what I desire. And because that woman is no longer here, no concern with the desire because she's getting killed. And we're not concerned that this desire is somehow going to get transferred to some other woman. That's already.
Why would they want to strip her if they're going to kill her? I mean, if they're going to stone her,
stone her.
I've seen a stoning, but I saw a movie with the stoning.
Oh, a movie with stoning.
And they dig a hole, and they put the woman into the hole, and the only thing that's left, and then they cover her, and the only thing that's left is her head and shoulders.
I don't know if it is by Jewish law. I mean, a movie is a movie. I don't know if that's the way it is by Jewish law. In Jewish law, she's thrown off a ditch, and then she usually they usually die on first impact once they fall down.
Oh no, that's not the stoning I saw.
Okay, that's not Jewish law.
Yeah,
if it's a rabbinic movie, maybe. I don't know.
No.
Yeah.
Sorry. Was that last comment from Rabbi? Was that in support of the sages?
Okay, so this last
Because
thing.
the sages seem to suggest that you cover both.
Right. So no, this is in support of Rabbi Yehuda.
Okay.
The reason why we're okay,
I
Rav is supporting the reason why we're okay with her being undressed. Oh no, they have it by the sages, meaning they have it by tradition, not from not
okay.
by tradition.
That's what I
Not those sages. Sorry, not to be confused.
Okay, no.
Not the sages who are disputing with Rabbi Yehuda.
No, okay,
They have it by tradition as a rule.
I
That
understand.
yeah. So in other words, Rav is suggesting is supporting Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Because we have it by tradition that that a person's desire for one woman doesn't get transferred to another, therefore we're okay with her being in the nude when she's stoned because she'll be killed. No one's going to think about her anymore, and that's it. It's over. When it comes to the Sotah woman, if she's exposed and it turns out she lives, people are going to still be thinking about her. Okay. So now the Gemara says, Amar Rava says that Rabbi Yehuda Kasha. You asked the question, and now you answered it with respect to Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, with respect to Rabbi Yehuda in the two different missions. But the Rabbanan like Kasha, are you not concerned with the contradiction in the sages here and the sages there? The sages here with respect to the Sotah say to uncover her. The sages there with respect to capital punishment say a woman should not be stoned in the nude. So you, Rabbah, are answering the question of the contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda. Well, what happened to your problem with the sages and the sages? You left that open. Like Kasha, that's not bothering you. So therefore, Rabbah now is compelled to answer the next part of the contradiction. The contradiction in the sages' view, namely, the sages with respect to the law of the Sotah say she should be exposed, whereas with respect to the law of capital punishment, she's not to be exposed. So Elam Rava, therefore Rava comes and says as follows: the contradiction between Rabbi Huda's opinion and Rabbi Huda's opinion is not a question, as we explained earlier. That when it comes to the stoning, Rabbi Huda is not concerned with people seeing her exposed because she's going to die and they're no longer going to care for her. But when it comes to the Sotah, we are concerned with people seeing her because she may live and then people are going to be thinking about her. Okay, that we resolved. Now top of page 8b, Chesam Beis. The sages view is also not in contradiction. Hacha here. The reason why we expose her in the sage's view, here, what's the reason why we expose her in the view of the sages? Mishum, because the verse reads, this is a verse we quoted earlier, it comes from Yecheskel, where there it says, and all other women will watch and see and learn. So by embarrassing her publicly, we add, there's a utilitarian value in exposing her. Because other women watching say, I don't want that to happen to me. And thus, it's a deterrent to stop other people from misbehaving. And therefore, we want to go through with exposing her, even though we're running the risk of some people who are watching, some of the young Kohanim, letting their imagination go. The sages say, look, let them control themselves, but we still need to do our part in deterring other women from misbehaving. And thus, we're going to expose her.
Maybe that's in line with what we said yesterday about not wanting to have two women together at the same time because it'll embolden that woman.
That's right. That's correct.
And the women will see that and it won't have the effect.
Correct. That's right. So that's a good point. So if two women are doing it together, like we said yesterday, and they embolden each other to say, okay, we don't care if we're getting exposed. Other women watch that and they say, okay, what's the big deal? We'll go through it also. That's right. The value of trying to set a precedent that we don't want people to go through with this will have been lost. And if they just do it alone and expose her, even though we're running the risk of some young Kohanim and their imagination.
But isn't part of Judaism modesty?
Yeah.
So even if they're going to kill her, I mean, why put her in the nude?
Sorry?
I can't understand why they would put her in the nude when they're going to kill her.
We're going to get there in a moment why we expose a person to when we kill them. We're going to do that in a second. In a minute, we're going to do that. We're going to explain that. But Hassam now, but first the Gemara continues. It says Hassam over there. Okay, so say when it comes to the law of the Sotah, we expose her because we want other women to see, and we want this to be a deterrent. But Hassam over there, with respect to the law of capital punishment, the fact that she's dying is enough of a deterrent. We don't have to further embarrass her, right? If this capital punishment is meant to deter others from doing the sin, don't worry about it. She's dying. That's a pretty good deterrent. You don't have to add to it and make her be exposed.
The Gemara suggests, let's say suggest, Levi Betarti, do both, kill her and expose her, adding to the punishment and not making it a further greater deterrent. Maybe if you're trying to deter, go all the way. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Baravua. Rav Nachman said in the name of Rabbi, son of Avua, Amar Kra, the verse reads, this is amazing. This comes up a lot in the Gemara and Sanhedrin, but it's amazing. It comes up here too. Amar Kra, the verse says, love your fellow Jew as yourself. And because you love your fellow Jew as yourself, even someone who's being convicted of capital punishment, still a Jew and still have to love them. This, by the way, is one of the proofs. This is Maram Shik writes about this, I think, if I remember correctly. The proof that love your fellow Jew extends even to a sinner. Because here the Gemara says that even someone who's convicted of a sin for which they're being killed, nonetheless, the law of love your fellow Jew applies. And therefore, therefore you ought to choose for them the best and most comfortable death. So even though this person is convicted of capital punishment, and by law this person has to be put to death, nonetheless, you as a fellow Jew who love your fellow Jew must make sure that this death is as comfortable as possible. And therefore, no reason to strip her down and further embarrass her. This is kind of in line with what you're saying, Alan.
Yeah, sure.
Leave her alone. You don't have to undress her also.
Of course.
You don't have to overdo it. Okay. So this makes all as well. So now we settled the contradiction between the sages and the contradiction between Rabbi Huda. Rabbi Huda says, and Rabbi Huda is concerned with the people watching. And he says, when it comes to capital punishment, she's stripped down, and we're not concerned with other people watching because she's going to die and no one's going to care about her anymore. And people's imagination aren't going to go there. When it comes to Sotah, she may live, and their imagination will go there, and therefore don't strip her down if she's good looking. The sages, however, say, we want to deter others from doing what she did. So when it comes to the law of the Sotah, expose her, and other women will see, wow, that's terrible and embarrassing. I don't want to do that. When it comes to capital punishment, the fact that she's dying is enough of a deterrent. We don't have to add to her embarrassment, especially considering, as Rav Nachman tells us, that we love our fellow Jew, and therefore choose for them a good death. It shouldn't be more humiliating than it has to be. And it shouldn't be more than it has to be.
That's more like it.
Now the Gemara says, well, we're still not done. We still have to explain why would we want to? Why does the Huda say to strip her down? Right, and even in the sages, they only say that a woman is not stripped down. But a man, in the sages' view, are stripped down. So what's the value of stripping someone down before they get killed? We're going to explain that right now. So the Gemara asks, first of all, this is how the Gemara gets there. Leima, let us suggest that Rav Nachman's statement that we are required to choose a good death for her suggests perhaps Tanoi. Maybe this is the root of the dispute. In other words, like this. Till now, we've been suggesting that Rabbi Huda is not concerned with people thinking about her naked because she's dying anyway. The sages, on the other hand, they want to extend love for her and not expose her more than she needs to be. So maybe, therefore, says the Gemara, Rabbi Huda rejects this idea of loving a Jew who's convicted of capital punishment. And therefore, we don't care for her anymore. Maybe this is the dispute. The sages say, even someone who's convicted of capital punishment, extend love and don't expose her more than necessary. Whereas the Buddha says, she's convicted of capital punishment. We don't love her anymore. Let her be exposed. Maybe this is the root of the dispute. But the Gemara rejects that. Yeah, what do you say?
Maybe far-fetched, but is it possible that without having clothing, she or he will die a quicker death by stoning?
Yeah, let's get there. Says the Gemara, no. Don't do that. Don't say that the Buddha rejects the idea of extending love even to someone who's convicted of capital punishment. That's the Gemara suggesting now. The Gemara is suggesting that maybe Rabbi Huda rejects the idea of extending love to her because she's convicted of capital punishment. We don't love her anymore. The Gemara says, Lo, don't do that. We still, even Rabbi Huda, the Kula Alma is Rav Nachman. Everybody agrees with Rav Nachman's statement that even someone who's convicted of capital punishment must be extended in the courtesy of love your fellow Jew. And therefore, even Rabbi Huda, who says to strip her down, is doing so out of love. Why? Why would he say that? Says the Gemara, here's the dispute between Rabbi Huda and Rabbanon. It's coming out of love. But Mar Savar, the sages are of the view that bizyoina adifle. It's better to, I'm sorry, which way? Yeah. People are more concerned with being embarrassed than being in pain. And as Roberts correctly suggested, the reason why we would strip her down and the reason why we strip the man down is because the less padding they have, the more quickly they'll die.
That's bullshit.
They're being thrown off off a cliff into a stone, and you want them to die on impact. So the less padding they're wearing, the quicker the death, and therefore no clothing. So now you have two principles against each other. On the one hand, you have pain, spare the person the pain, and take off their clothing. Or you have the other hand, spare the person the embarrassment and keep their clothing on. So which one?
Clothing's not going to make a difference.
Sorry?
Clothing's not going to make a difference. I mean, unless they put her into a big winter jacket or something like
Or say
that.
even that tiny little bit. Even a tiny little bit.
Can't.
So therefore, Rabbi Huda's of the view, the sages of the view, the sages say that, like you're suggesting, Alan, the little bit of pain she's going to get doesn't equate the embarrassment, and therefore her embarrassment is more precious to her, more than the little bit of pain her body is going to go through from that tiny little amount of delayed death. And therefore the sages say keep her dressed out of love for her, because we don't want her to be embarrassed, even if it might cause her a tiny little fraction about extra more pain, because there's a little bit of cushion in her Latin when she's landing. But Mar Savar, Hudas of the view, Sara de Kufa Adif, the pain, physical pain, outweighs Tfei Mebizyonia more than embarrassing. And therefore, in Rabbi Huda's view, we want to make the death as quick as possible, even if it means she'll be embarrassed. And there's the root of the dispute. There's the root of the dispute. So in summary, we have, when it comes to the law of the Sotah, the question is, how far are we going to go to deter other women from behaving the way she does? Rabbi Huda says, you don't have to go so far as to expose her chest, because we run the risk of young Kohanim getting excited, considering she might continue living, keeping their imagination going. When it comes to the woman being stoned, says Rabbi Huda, we're going to expose her. We're not worried about people getting excited because she's going to die anyway, and their imagination isn't going to go there. And the virtue of exposing her is, so that way her death is as painless as possible, considering she has no cushioning, she has no clothing to extend even for a millisecond her death. The sages, on the other hand, say, when it comes to the Sotah, we want to expose her to make the strongest deterrent. Even if we're going to run the risk of young Kohanim and people getting excited about her, we're still going to expose her because this is going to make the strongest deterrent for other women. But when it comes to stoning, when it comes to killing her, the little fraction amount of pain we're saving her by keeping her clothing on is of no consequence, considering when weighed against embarrassing her and making her naked. And if we're better keep her clothes on and not embarrass her, to spare her that embarrassment, even if it's going to mean a tiny little bit extra more pain. There is essentially the root of the dispute. But it's quite amazing how even the sensitivity of the sages, both Rabbi Huda and Rabbana, the sensitivity in that even a woman who's being convicted of capital punishment, nonetheless, each in their own way, are trying to find a way to make it as less painful or as least embarrassing. And at the same time, even a Kohen who's in the Holy of Holies and watching a mitzvah doesn't take away from the fact that he has an animal soul. He's going to see a woman like that, it's going to have an effect on him. And therefore, we have to take that into consideration as well. All right, have a wonderful day, everybody.
Good day. Thank you.
You too, Levi. Good class.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.